This week we're going to show you how to do a layout in HTML using a framework called Bootstrap. It just makes things easier when it comes to coding this layout. The layout will consist of rows and it will consist of columns, and I'll show you that very shortly. So here's the project I prepared earlier. Get rid of the ad. And we can see we've got one column here. We've got another column in a row here. Now we have a bit of a problem that we've got two columns side by side, but they're looking incredibly narrow. Now don't worry about that at this stage. We deal with responsive design later in the unit. I can show you how it looks in a bigger screen in a second. And down here we have a footer. So what we'd like you to do with your design is make sure that you do have at least one section in there that does have columns to provide a bit of visual variety and also help you collect information together. Let's change our view to the full page view, and that will give us a better idea of what this should look like. So here we go, we've got two columns. Now some of this has quite advanced work in it. This pretty simple, this pretty simple. But as we go down, here you can see I've got a button with a semi-transparent background. We can show you that in a separate video, as well as if we go up and down, you'll see that this is centered horizontally and vertically, and this is centered vertically. That's a little bit more tricky. I'll do that in a separate video. And we've got the footer down here. So this video will show you how to create the layout itself of row, column, row, column, row, two columns, and another row with a column. I've created a new blank project. Now, for the most part, it is often easier to code the layout and then put the content within it. Now the problem is I want to show you the changes that these layout instructions give, and I can't do that with a big blank page. So I'm just going to type some content in. I'm not going to show you that on the whole video because that would be very boring for you to watch. So I'll just do that right now. Okay, here we go. We've got some content here. We've got incredible plant sale. Buy your bulbs now for spring flowering. Buy tulips, daffodils and irises online. We've got a paragraph in there, and then we've got our copyright down the bottom. So there's a couple of things I want to do to start off with, and that's I'm going to actually show you how to use special characters. You can find these online. I'll provide you with a cheat sheet, but for instance, where we've got copyright, and if I zoom in there, you can see that, you can actually use the copyright symbol. And like all the special characters, it starts with an ampersand. This one is copy and a semicolon. And you can see that we now have a little copyright symbol. Now there's one other place where we need to use a special character. That's right here, not the uppy, downy, dumb quote. We need an apostrophe, which is a smart quote, a right single quote. So I'll just show you where we can put that. If I zoom in here again, whoopsie. Let's go back up. Here we go. So rather than have that dumb, uppy, downy quote, we're going to say ampersand, RSQO, which is right single quote. And now if I scoot to the right, we should see it now has a proper quote mark there. So that's just some of the housekeeping that we like to do when we're doing web design. So I'm just going to click save now. Now the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to find an image to put in here. So again, let's just go have a look. I'm going to go to Pixabay because they're Creative Commons 0 licensing. And let's have a look for seedlings here. And here we go. This is the one that I want. I'm just going to download, try not to hit the ad, download, and I'll just download that at quite a small size. You can download it at a larger size and optimize it for the web, ideally. Okay, so I've now got my seedling. Just going to go File, Save. What about File, Save As? Will it let me do that? No, it will not. Okay, so we'll quit out of the preview there. Now, the other thing that we need to do is host an image online if we're going to use it. So, what is it? Image BB. Here we go. And you don't need to create an account. You can just upload the images there. So I'm just going to drag that over. Here we go. We don't want to auto-delete it because you need this to be available later. If you're using this for any other service, any other purpose, you can always get it to auto-delete after a certain amount of time, but I'm just going to click Upload. Great. Now, if I copy this link and paste it in the browser, it gives me the whole page, not the image itself. So I'm actually going to go right-click now and copy image address, and that will give me the pure image itself. Just going to scoot this down a little bit. Now let's just add this for the time being. I'm going to show you a better way of doing it, but this is one way we can do it. Okay, so this is one way that we can add the image. You should be able to see that now, and that's directly linked there. Fantastic. Okay, so now we've got all of our content. Let's start doing a layout. Now, the layout, we're going to use a framework called Bootstrap. So I'm just going to go to getbootstrap.com. I'm just going to zoom in so you can see that URL, getbootstrap.com. And you can also get that by just searching for Bootstrap online. And if I scoot on down here, this is a CSS framework, which means that someone else has done all the work in establishing what classes you might need. Now, we're going to use it for layout, not for design elements like button design, fonts, things like that, because quite frankly, Bootstrap looks like it was designed by a programmer. In that it's not the most designerly thing. I want to mark your design. I want to see your design. You really need to create your own style for things, but it's okay to use it for layout. So if I scroll down, we have a section called CSS, and this gives you a link tag to paste into your head section. If you were doing this website in Dreamweaver or something like that, you would paste it between the head tags, but I'm going to show you the trick to doing it in CodePen. So down here we have the entire link tag. I'm going to click Copy, and this will link our project to the content delivery network for the Bootstrap framework. So we go back to our project, and here we go to Settings. And you've got to click on HTML, so you'll be in Pen Settings by clicking the Settings button at the top. Click on HTML to open that up, and this gives you your settings. And you see how we've got stuff for head. That's where we need to paste it. And that's where you would paste the link tag for your web fonts as well. So I'm going to save and close, and we can already see it's made a change because we've got a different font here, which is the default one for Bootstrap. I believe it's Open Sans. Okay, let's do the layout. The first part of the layout is the container, and that surrounds all of your design. A container creates a margin to the left and right, and often that's a nice neat way of doing it. There's also the option to use container fluid, which is container-fluid, and that will make it fluid or liquid or based on a percentage. So it's 100% of the width of the page, and it just shrinks and stretches as the browser gets smaller and bigger. It's up to you which one you use. So we add a div tag, which is pointy bracket div. And this is a tag that has no semantic meaning in itself. In other words, it's not adding content. We don't have to tell the browser what type of content it is. It's just a division on the page with which we can add some visual style. So to tell the browser what to do with this div, we have to add a class. A class is a set of bespoke instructions created by the style sheet, similar to what we've been doing when we have a selector like H1 or image, and then we tell it what to do with the CSS. But this is for a specific bespoke custom-made class, in this case called container. So let's add that to our design so you can see what it does. So let's add that tag now. So right up the very top of our HTML, we add our div tag, which means right down the bottom after the copyright planet, we add the next one, the end div, /div. So now to tell the browser what part of the style sheet to follow in styling this, we have to add a class. And we're going to call that container. I'm just going to save that. So you can immediately see the difference here. If we change view and go to full page view, you can see that it's added a margin to the left, it's added a margin to the right. So this is the start of our design. I'll show you the difference if we add container fluid. We'll save that again and see how now it's 100% of the width. And if we go full page view, there we go, it's 100% of the width. And if we shrink it and stretch it, the things shrink and stretch accordingly. The next task we do is to divide our layout into rows within that container. So a row is a vertical section of the design. It's either something where the content takes up the whole width of the page, or it's where you've got columns sitting side by side. So in this case, the top row is the header, the second row is that tagline below it, the third row has the two columns of the text and the image, and the last row is the footer. And again, we use div tags, but in this case, the class is row, and we're remembering to put the end div tag at the end of that row. So let's have a look at how we add that to the code. I'm going to zoom in here. We can see where we've got our div class equals container fluid. So directly below that, for our H1 main heading, I'm going to say div class equals row. And then at the end of that row, we go end div. And there we go. Let's keep it neat by indenting this. So this way the indentations tell us where things are nested. So now we've got the H2, the tagline. And again, we're going to go div class equals row. You end up typing this an awful lot, trust me. Again, we're going to indent that, and our end div at the end of that row after the H2. Now we've got our columns. So you put all of the columns in one row. This is where most people get things mixed up. You only need one row for all of your columns side by side. Div class equals row. And this will contain our H3 of buying the tulips, our paragraph, and our image down the bottom. But we have to end our row just before the footer here. So again, I'm just going to indent all of these things so that it just keeps it a bit neater. There we go, and the image. And then we create another one down the bottom. Div class equals row, and this is for the footer. Now it ends up looking a little bit confusing because see how we've got two end divs in a row? At the end of your Bootstrap layout, in theory, you should actually have 3 once we add the columns. But currently we've got 2. We've got the end of the row and we've got the end of the container. So this is perfectly fine. If you think you're going to worry and forget which one's which, you can always add a comment. There we go. And we'll add a comment here, just so we're really, really clear. Now, another thing you can do is when you click on it, see how it underlines the matching pair? So that can help you as well. Okay, let's save that. There's absolutely no change to the design in doing that, and that's because that was just adding the rows. Now we're going to add a column, but the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to zoom in again to the CSS. Let's fix the image because the image currently is just plonked on the page at whatever size it is. We want it to be 100% wide, and you'll see why soon. So I'm just going to say width 100%. So if you remember back to when we added images, it's IMG, so it affects all of the image tags. We've got our squiggly brackets, and then we've got our declaration with the instruction to set the width to 100%. And let's have a look. That's made it 100% of the page width. That's okay for now. We'll fix that in just a minute. The last step is to add columns, and do remember that even if your content stretches the full row and the full width of the container, you still need to put a column because otherwise the alignment of the content within those sections can become very strange. So first we've got div class equals col for the entire header, and remembering we always add that end div after the content as well. Div class equals col and end div for the subheading. Then when we get to our 2 column sections, we still give it the same instruction, div class equals col. Why is that? Because the Bootstrap code tells the browser to have a look at the width of the row and the container, and basically say if you've got 1 column in there, it stretches the full 12 column width. If you've got 2 columns in there, put them side by side, divide up the 12 column grid so that each of those get 6 columns each. So this is a nice, easy way to have equal width columns. You just pop them in side by side, surrounded by a div class equals row. And then for the footer, because it's the full width, we just go div class equals col there as well. Let's add those columns. I'm just going to increase the size here just to make it easier for us to see. There we go. Great. So we've got our rows. Now we just add our columns within it. So we're nesting these. Div class equals col, and this is our header section. So again, we've got to have an end div. The end div here matches the end col. The end div here matches the row. So just make sure you are nesting and you have, for every one of these starting tags, you have a matching ending one. The matching ending one for the container, of course, is at the very end. Oops, I'll just delete that. So it's a plain old vanilla container. And we do this for each of our rows where we need a column. Div class equals col. If it stretches the full width of the page, you only put 1 in. Never forget to put that in though. I can't emphasize that enough. Then if we go down to the next one, this is where we've got our 2 columns. So we have to keep our wits about us. Div class equals col. Now the text is going to be in 1 column. So I end that col right here between the text and the image so that I can start a new column for that image. Div class equals col for the image, and then we end that div just before this end div, which is the row. Think of them like nested Russian dolls. Div class equals col. This is for the footer. And again, I'm going to put an end div, and let's add a comment to make it all make sense. End of column. And there we go. Now I'm going to zoom out again. I'm going to save this, and I'm going to change my view to full page, and we can see how this works. And there we go. We have content up here, content below it. We have an add or close, and then we have our two columns here, and then we've got a single column. Now the last thing I'm going to show you before we start styling things all nice and pretty is how we can add a little bit more space. Don't add break tags, my goodness, no, they're not for layout, they are only to separate content. What we want to do is add a little bit of padding around these. So if I go to my H1, and I'm going to zoom in so you can see this, let's add padding top, and we can do it by pixels, you can do it by percentages, by vertical height, or by M, or the font size. I'm going to choose font size. So let's say 2M, and padding bottom 2M. Now let's see what that does. There we go. We have a nice bit of a gap there, and we might want to center this. And if you want to center it for text, it is text align center. There we go. Let's do that for the H2. We won't need as much padding, but we'll add a bit of padding. H2 padding, and there's a way to do this even quicker. You can add top, right, bottom, left, all in the one line. You just say padding, and it always goes clockwise from the top, right, bottom, left. So if we want 1M at the top, 0 to the right, 1M at the bottom, 0 to the left, that's how it works. And there we go. We probably want to align that to the center too. So again, text, because it's text, we can text align center. It's a bit more complicated if you have buttons. Okay. I'll save this. Let's have a quick squiz and see what it looks like in full page, and that is working fine. Obviously, you'll be wanting to change your text size and things like that. We'll do the same with the footer now. Just add a little bit of padding there. We won't do it to these columns just yet. That's absolutely fine. That's aligning with the top of that one. And in the next video, I'll show you how we can add a button and then vertically align these things. So going to our footer. Now for this one, it's a little bit more complicated, because if you have a look at our footer, here it was easy with an H1 and an H2. It's the only time it appears on the page. But this is a paragraph. We have other paragraphs. We might not want to make that have a padding above and below. So instead, what we can do is we can actually give it a custom class, and we're going to call it footer. And you can add this. You can have multiple classes. You just separate them with a space. So this div now has two classes applied to it, the col of Bootstrap and footer, which I'm going to create. Now, if you're ever worried that it might be using an existing Bootstrap one, you can actually make it custom with your name. So I'm just saying Ali footer, and that way there's no way known there's going to be a Bootstrap class called Ali footer. So that makes it a little bit safer. So here, if I type in my CSS, Ali, footer, hang on, forgot to, full stop. If you're doing a custom class, you have to start it with a full stop. This, without a full stop, is a selector. It's a tag, existing tag, whereas this is a class that we're adding to the div tag. So it has to be full stop, Ali footer. And let's add padding, and again we'll just do the top and the bottom, and we'll say 1M0. And in fact, we can be really, really, really lazy and just put 1M0. And what happens then is the browser repeats that. It says, oh, we've only got 2 bits of information. We need 4. Oh, they must have just meant us to repeat that. And so that will work that way. So let's save it. We'll go to the view, full page view, get rid of our ad, zoom down, and there we go. There's a little bit more padding in there. It looks a little bit better. And we can, again, go into the editor. And if you want that to be centered, all you need to do is text align center. Use that sparingly for paragraphs, please. There's nothing worse than having a huge amount of body text and having it centered. It looks really amateur, I'm afraid. And there we go. We've got a little bit of a footer happening there. And if you want to add a background color, that's pretty easy too. Let's add some to the header. We put it into the H1 here. And I'm just going to find a color that I've got written down here. Okay, so here, if I scoot on in, it's background color. Again, remember, American spelling. And you can use a hex code from your wonderful color palette. Just make sure you have enough contrast between the background color and the text so you can easily read it. And the color I'm choosing is 95D0B8. And there we go. We now have a background color there. We can also add it to the H2 here. So we'll add a different color in here. So, you could do, if I chose green there. There we go. Now you might decide you don't want a gap between the two of them. Now this is not very good contrast. I'm just wanting to show you something here. Remember how we had the padding to add to the top and the bottom? If you've got white space between them and you want to get rid of that, that's actually a margin that's on the outside of it. So here we'd want to say margin bottom 0. And that gets rid of the gap between the two things here. I'd recommend going very sparingly on the background colors. It can end up looking really dated. So be very careful as you use it. Oops, hang on, I removed it from the wrong one. Oops. Be very sparing in how you use it, and use it very deliberately to separate out different sections. For a really good information hierarchy, I might decide instead that I want to use color for this heading here to draw the eye, in which case my H2 here, I would want to give that a color, not a background color. I'm just going to chuck in green for now, and that will serve my purpose, because if I make that nice and big, that'll be the first thing I look at, then here, and then down here. Now, one thing you will note is that this image, yes, it's the width of 100%, but look, it's chopped off. Now, you may decide that's not what you want for your design. So I'm going to show you another. Now you see in the full page mode it looks a little bit different, but I'll show you a different way to do this, where you put it as a background image instead of an image tag, and that will be in another video shortly.